What if I told you that the most powerful response you can have when someone attacks you, criticizes you, or tries to manipulate you isn't to defend yourself, isn't to explain your position, isn't to prove you're right, but something Carl Jung discovered to be psychologically devastating for those who try to control you? Simply disappear. If this resonates with you, please hit the subscribe button and give this video a like. Your support helps us create more content that can genuinely transform how you handle conflict and reclaim your psychological power. Most people have been conditioned to believe that when someone challenges them, attacks their character, or tries to provoke them into an argument, they need to respond immediately. They need to defend themselves, explain their actions, justify their choices, or prove their worth. But Jung discovered that this immediate reaction is exactly what gives manipulative people the power they're seeking over you. Jung realized that when you react to provocation, when you feel compelled to explain yourself to people who have already decided to misunderstand you, when you engage with criticism from people who aren't genuinely interested in understanding your perspective, you're actually feeding what he called the shadow projection of the other person. You see, Jung understood that when someone attacks you with unusual intensity, when their criticism seems disproportionate to whatever you actually did, when they seem determined to paint you as the villain regardless of facts or context, they're not really responding to you. They're responding to aspects of themselves that they can't accept, qualities they've rejected in their own personality that they're now projecting onto you. When you react to these projections, when you try to defend yourself against accusations that feel unfair or distorted, you're actually participating in their psychological drama. You're allowing their unconscious material to dictate your emotional state and control your behavior. You're giving them exactly what their shadow needs, evidence that you are indeed the problem they need you to be. Jung discovered that the most psychologically sophisticated response to this kind of manipulation is what he called strategic withdrawal. Not running away in fear, not avoiding all conflict, but consciously choosing not to participate in psychological dynamics that serve other people's unconscious needs, rather than genuine communication or resolution. This strategic withdrawal involves what Jung called the withdrawal of psychological energy from interactions that are designed to drain you rather than serve any constructive purpose. When someone is clearly more interested in being right than understanding truth, more invested in making you wrong than solving actual problems, more committed to drama than genuine resolution, the wisest response is often to simply remove your energy from the situation entirely. But here's what makes this approach so powerful and why Jung considered it essential for psychological health. When you don't react to provocation, you force the other person to confront their own psychological material without the distraction of your defensive responses. When you don't explain yourself to people who are determined to misunderstand you, you stop participating in their projection process and leave them alone with their own shadow content. This often creates what Jung called psychological discomfort in the person who was trying to provoke you. They were expecting your reaction, counting on your defensiveness, planning to use your explanations as evidence of whatever narrative they've already constructed about you. When you simply disappear instead, they're left with the uncomfortable reality of their own motivation for starting the conflict in the first place. Most people can't tolerate this discomfort for long. When their projection target disappears, when their emotional punching bag becomes unavailable, when their source of drama suddenly vanishes, they're forced to either find another target or begin examining their own behavior and motivations. Either way, you're no longer participating in their psychological dysfunction. Jung understood that this approach requires what he called ego strength, the psychological capacity to tolerate being misunderstood without feeling compelled to correct every misperception. Most people react defensively because they can't bear the thought of someone having a negative opinion of them, even when that person's opinion is based on distortion, projection, or malicious intent. But Jung discovered that true psychological freedom comes from developing what he called inner authority, a sense of self-worth and identity that doesn't depend on external validation or the approval of others. When you know who you are, when you're clear about your values and intentions, when you're grounded in your own psychological truth, other people's projections and distortions lose their power to disturb your inner peace. This doesn't mean becoming indifferent to all feedback or refusing to engage in genuine conflict resolution. Jung was very clear about the difference between strategic withdrawal from manipulation and healthy engagement with constructive criticism or legitimate disagreements. When someone approaches you with genuine curiosity about your perspective, when they seem willing to listen as well as speak, when they're interested in understanding rather than just being right, engagement can be productive and worthwhile. But when someone has clearly decided what kind of person you are and what your motivations must be, regardless of your actual words or actions, engagement often becomes a waste of your psychological energy. Jung found that people who practice strategic withdrawal consistently report several remarkable changes in their relationships and overall life experience. First, they stop attracting people who are primarily interested in drama, conflict, and emotional manipulation. When you consistently refuse to participate in psychological games, people who are addicted to those games naturally lose interest in you and seek more willing participants elsewhere. Second, they develop what Jung called energetic sovereignty, the capacity to direct their psychological energy toward people and activities that genuinely nourish and support their development, rather than constantly defending themselves against attacks and criticism that serve no constructive purpose. Third, they often find that their actual relationships, the connections with people who genuinely care about them and want to understand them, become much deeper and more authentic. When you're not constantly drained by managing manipulative dynamics, you have much more energy available for meaningful connection with people who deserve your time and attention. But Jung also identified several common mistakes that people make when they first try to implement strategic withdrawal. The first mistake is what he called reactive disappearance, withdrawing from situations while still being emotionally hooked by them. This isn't true withdrawal, because your psychological energy is still entangled with the person or situation you're trying to avoid. True strategic withdrawal involves what Jung called energetic disengagement, the conscious decision to stop feeding your mental and emotional energy into interactions that don't serve your psychological well-being. This means not just physically removing yourself, but actually letting go of the need to be understood, validated, or vindicated by people who have demonstrated that they're not interested in genuine understanding. The second common mistake is what Jung called indiscriminate withdrawal, avoiding all conflict or challenging conversations rather than learning to distinguish between manipulative provocation and legitimate disagreement. Strategic withdrawal isn't about becoming conflict-averse or avoiding all difficult conversations. It's about developing the discernment to recognize when engagement is likely to be productive versus when it's likely to be a waste of your psychological resources. Jung developed specific criteria for making this distinction. Productive engagement is possible when the other person demonstrates genuine curiosity about your perspective, shows willingness to examine their own assumptions, takes responsibility for their own emotional reactions, and seems interested in finding solutions rather than just proving points. Manipulative provocation, on the other hand, typically involves attacking your character rather than addressing specific behaviors, refusing to acknowledge any validity in your perspective, making you responsible for their emotional reactions, and showing more interest in winning than understanding. The third mistake Jung identified is what he called withdrawal without boundaries, disappearing from situations without establishing clear limits about what kinds of behavior you will and won't tolerate in the future. This often leads to cycles where the same people continue attempting the same manipulative tactics because they haven't received clear information about your boundaries. Jung found that effective strategic withdrawal often needs to be accompanied by what he called boundary communication, clear and simple statements about what you will and won't participate in. This doesn't require long explanations or justifications. It might be as simple as, "I don't engage in conversations where my character is being attacked," or "I'm not available for discussions that seem designed to prove I'm wrong rather than solve actual problems." These boundary communications serve several purposes. They give genuine people clear information about how to have productive interactions with you. They often cause manipulative people to reveal their true intentions more clearly, and they protect you from having to make the same withdrawal decisions repeatedly with the same individuals. But Jung emphasized that the most important aspect of strategic withdrawal is what he called the internal work, the psychological development that allows you to disengage from external drama because you're no longer dependent on others for your sense of worth, identity, or emotional stability. This internal work involves developing what Jung called psychological self-sufficiency, the capacity to validate your own experiences, trust your own perceptions, and maintain your emotional equilibrium without requiring external confirmation or approval. When you have this internal stability, other people's opinions and projections naturally have less power to disturb your peace or control your behavior. Jung found that this psychological self-sufficiency develops through what he called shadow integration, the conscious recognition and acceptance of your own imperfections and limitations. When you're honest about your own flaws and mistakes, when you've done the work of accepting your own humanity, other people's criticisms and attacks lose much of their sting because you're no longer defending an idealized self-image. This doesn't mean becoming indifferent to legitimate feedback or refusing to acknowledge when you've made mistakes. It means developing the capacity to distinguish between constructive criticism that can help you grow and manipulative attacks that are designed to destabilize you psychologically. Now I want to share with you the most profound discovery Jung made about strategic withdrawal, something that will fundamentally transform how you understand not just conflict resolution, but the very nature of psychological power and how to reclaim it from people who have been unconsciously draining your energy. Jung realized that when you master the art of strategic withdrawal, you're not just protecting yourself from manipulation and drama, you're actually practicing what he called conscious non-participation in the collective shadow, the mass psychological dysfunction that keeps most people trapped in cycles of reactivity, defensiveness, and unconscious projection. You see, Jung understood that most human conflict isn't really about the surface issues that people think they're arguing about. It's about unconscious psychological material that gets activated when people encounter triggers that remind them of unresolved trauma, unintegrated shadow aspects, or unmet psychological needs from their past. When someone attacks you with unusual intensity, when their reaction seems disproportionate to whatever actually happened, when they seem determined to make you into a villain, regardless of your actual intentions or actions, they're usually not responding to you at all. They're responding to psychological material from their own history that you've somehow activated by resembling someone from their past or representing qualities they can't accept in themselves. Jung discovered that when you react to these projections, when you try to defend yourself against accusations that don't really match your actual behavior or intentions, you become what he called a co-conspirator in their psychological drama. You start playing the role they need you to play in order to avoid dealing with their own unconscious material. But when you simply disappear, when you withdraw your energy from their projection process, something remarkable happens. They're forced to confront the psychological material they were trying to project onto you. Without your participation in their drama, they either need to find another projection target or begin examining their own motivations and reactions. This is why strategic withdrawal is often so psychologically unsettling for people who are used to provoking reactions. They were counting on your defensiveness to validate their narrative about you. They were expecting your explanations to provide material they could twist into further evidence of whatever they've already decided you represent. When you simply vanish instead, they're left alone with their own psychological content. Jung found that this forced self-confrontation often leads to one of two outcomes. Either the person begins to examine their own behavior and motivations, which can lead to genuine psychological growth, or they become more obviously manipulative and unreasonable, which makes their true nature visible to others and removes any ambiguity about who is actually creating the dysfunction. Both outcomes are positive for you because they remove you from the position of being gaslit, manipulated, or made responsible for other people's emotional reactions. When you stop participating in projection processes, reality becomes much clearer for everyone involved. But Jung discovered that mastering strategic withdrawal requires developing what he called discerning consciousness, the ability to distinguish between situations that call for engagement and situations that call for withdrawal. This discernment operates on several different levels simultaneously. On the psychological level, you learn to recognize when someone is genuinely interested in understanding your perspective versus when they're just looking for ammunition to use against you. People who are open to genuine communication will demonstrate curiosity about your thoughts and feelings, willingness to consider that they might be wrong or missing information, and genuine interest in finding solutions rather than just proving points. People who are operating from projection and manipulation will show the opposite characteristics. They'll seem to have already decided what your motivations are, regardless of what you actually say. They'll interpret everything you do through the lens of their predetermined narrative about you. They'll show more interest in being right than in understanding truth or solving actual problems. On the energetic level, you learn to recognize when interactions are genuinely nourishing versus when they're draining your psychological resources without providing any benefit. Jung found that healthy interactions, even when they involve disagreement or conflict, tend to leave both people feeling more clear, more understanding, or more connected. Manipulative interactions leave at least one person feeling confused, drained, or somehow diminished. On the practical level, you learn to recognize when continued engagement is likely to lead to resolution versus when it's likely to escalate dysfunction. This often depends more on the other person's willingness to take responsibility for their own emotional reactions and examine their own contributions to the conflict than on the specific content of the disagreement. Jung developed what he called the withdrawal protocol, a specific sequence of steps for disengaging from manipulative dynamics while maintaining your psychological integrity and protecting your energy for more productive pursuits. The first step is what Jung called recognition without reaction, the conscious acknowledgement that you're dealing with projection or manipulation without immediately responding to it. This creates what he called psychological space, a brief pause that allows you to choose your response, rather than automatically reacting from defensiveness or hurt. During this pause, you ask yourself several key questions that Jung found essential for making wise decisions about engagement. Is this person genuinely interested in understanding my perspective, or have they already decided what I represent to them? Is their reaction proportionate to what actually happened, or does it seem to be fueled by psychological material that has nothing to do with me? Will continued engagement likely lead to greater understanding and resolution, or will it just provide more material for their projection process? The second step is what Jung called boundary assertion without justification, clearly stating what you will and won't participate in without providing extensive explanations that can be twisted or used against you. This might sound like, I don't engage in conversations where my character is being attacked, or I'm not available for discussions that seem designed to prove I'm wrong rather than understand what happened. Jung found that these boundary statements need to be simple, clear, and non-negotiable. The moment you start explaining or justifying your boundaries, you open the door for manipulation and argument about whether your boundaries are reasonable or legitimate. Your boundaries don't need to be understood or approved by others. They just need to be consistently maintained by you. The third step is what Jung called energetic withdrawal, the conscious decision to stop feeding your mental and emotional energy into the interaction, regardless of how the other person responds to your boundary. This is often the most challenging step because manipulative people tend to escalate their tactics when they realize you're no longer participating in their drama. They might increase their accusations, play victim, threaten consequences, or try to involve other people in pressuring you to re-engage. Jung found that this escalation is actually a positive sign because it means your withdrawal is working. They're having to work harder to get the reaction they want, which often reveals their true motivations more clearly. The fourth step is what Jung called conscious redirection, deliberately focusing your psychological energy on people and activities that genuinely nourish and support your development, rather than continuing to think about or analyze the interaction you've withdrawn from. Jung discovered that many people sabotage their own strategic withdrawal by continuing to mentally rehearse arguments, replay conversations, or seek validation from others about whether they made the right choice. This mental engagement keeps you energetically connected to the dysfunction you're trying to escape. True withdrawal requires what Jung called complete energetic disengagement, letting go of the need to be understood, vindicated, or validated by people who have demonstrated that they're not interested in genuine understanding. This often means accepting that some people will maintain distorted perceptions of you, and that's their right and their problem, not yours. Jung found that this complete disengagement often leads to what he called psychological sovereignty, the recognition that your worth, identity, and emotional well-being don't depend on other people's opinions or approval. When you reach this level of psychological development, other people's projections and manipulations naturally lose their power to disturb your inner peace. But Jung also discovered that people who master strategic withdrawal often develop what he called magnetic authenticity, a quality of being that naturally attracts healthy people while repelling those who are primarily interested in drama and dysfunction. When you stop participating in psychological games, when you maintain clear boundaries while remaining open to genuine connection, you become attractive to others who share these values. This creates what Jung called an upward spiral in relationship quality. Instead of constantly managing manipulative dynamics, you find yourself surrounded by people who respect boundaries, take responsibility for their own emotions, and are genuinely interested in mutual understanding and support. Jung realized that this transformation in relationship quality often extends beyond personal relationships into professional and social contexts as well. When you consistently demonstrate that you won't participate in gossiping, blaming, or other forms of collective shadow behavior, you often find that healthier group dynamics emerge around you. But perhaps most importantly, Jung discovered that mastering strategic withdrawal develops what he called inner authority, a sense of self-worth and identity that doesn't require external validation. When you know who you are, when you're clear about your values and intentions, when you're grounded in your own psychological truth, other people's opinions and projections naturally have less power to control your emotional state or influence your decisions. This inner authority becomes the foundation for what Jung called conscious living, making choices based on your authentic values and genuine insights rather than reacting to other people's expectations, manipulations, or projections. When you live from this centered place, you naturally attract experiences and relationships that support your continued growth and authentic expression. If you've recognized yourself in this exploration of strategic withdrawal and want to develop greater skill in protecting your energy while maintaining healthy relationships, I want you to subscribe to this channel and turn on notifications for more insights that can help you reclaim your psychological power. Share this video with others who might be struggling with manipulative relationships or feeling drained by people who seem determined to create drama and conflict. Sometimes the most powerful transformation happens when we learn that we don't have to participate in other people's psychological dysfunction. And leave a comment sharing your own experience with strategic withdrawal. Have you tried simply disappearing from conflicts instead of defending yourself? What happened when you stopped explaining yourself to people who seem determined to misunderstand you? How has setting boundaries changed the quality of your relationships? Because Jung's ultimate message about strategic withdrawal is this: your psychological energy is your most precious resource, and you have both the right and the responsibility to protect it from people who want to drain it for their own unconscious purposes. You don't owe explanations to people who have already decided what your motivations are. You don't need to defend yourself against projections that have nothing to do with your actual character or intentions. Stop participating in other people's psychological dramas and start directing your energy toward people and activities that genuinely support your growth and well-being. The power to transform your relationships and reclaim your peace is always in your hands. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply disappear.